Welcome to the third and the final series of Desk Notes, titled The Environment of Learning, where we look at how might we create and facilitate better learning experiences that aid collaboration and build cognitive clarity. My name is Liz and I'm with Steelcase, and I'll be your host for this session. Over the first series, we welcome Andrew Currie of Outto Design Group and Jean-Philippe of Delhom Acoustics to explore better learning experiences through design with a particular focus on acoustics. Hello, Andrew and JP. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Liz.
Hello.
On the second series, we had Douglas Newkirk, Creative Director and Thought Leader, and Louie Cheng of PureLiving to explore better learning experiences through design with a particular focus on air quality. Hello, Douglas and Louie. Thank you for being with us today.
Hi, Liz.
Hi, Liz. Great to be here.
In the first series, what we'll do is that before we do a quick recap of the takeaway from the two series, I'd like to share that we will be including the links to these recorded series towards the end of our session, so do look out for it in the chat box. In the first series, we learned from Andrew that there's a need to design an array of spaces to support learners and their evolving learning needs and activities. We heard the amazing story of the angel in the library, where design can trigger an emotional response from users, which is based on the individual's interpretation of the space. In the story, the design element has enabled the learner to have a greater sense of security in the library. From JP, we learned that it is proven that poor acoustics will result in an increase in learners' and educators' stress and fatigue level, as it is energy draining for both the learner and the educator to hear well or be heard. It is kind of like being in a noisy restaurant and trying to enjoy the meal. I think you get the idea. Lastly, acoustic plays well when incorporated in the early stages of a project to avoid abortive works and achieve optimal time and resource management. In the second series, we heard from Douglas that every space can be a space for knowledge transfer, and that's a form of learning. And we undergo the 5 modes of experience while working and learning. The 5 modes are task, social, discovery, entertainment, and aspiration. And learning happens best through storytelling, and that when our environment is designed to engage our senses, it can provide meaningful triggers and aid memory recall and learning. The ability to impact how we perceive a space plays to our 6th sense, which is the sense of perception, and that can potentially motivate learning. With Louie, we learned that there's a strong correlation between air quality and the learner's performance, and we quote Harvard School of Public Health. And there's a huge impact on indoor air quality on our cognitive function for both students and adults. For instance, carbon dioxide or volatile organic compounds, commonly known as VOCs, are found to have an impact on the abilities such as problem solving and decision making. Scientists found that the greater the level of carbon dioxide and VOCs in an indoor environment, the poorer the test scores are on these abilities. Today, we've come back together with all our speakers for a live event to further explore the idea and challenge and the needs that we are seeing in the current learning environments, the trends and the shifts, and most importantly, how can we address them? Our discussion will be based on the recent global Steelcase study known as Learn Better, where we look at the impact that the crisis had on learners, educators, learning, and learning environments. Steelcase made a commitment to be science-based and data-driven and conducted research to develop insights into the pandemic's impact and how this will drive change in where and how students and adults learn. Now let's talk about our experiences in 2020, which we cannot ignore. The Brookings Institute has said that the crisis offers an important reflection point for leaders, education leaders, to question the status quo and explore new approaches for delivering quality education to millions. At Steelcase, we believe that it's not about coming back to the school, campus, or workplace. It's about coming back to a better experience based on our learnings in 2020. Today, joined by our experts that work in markets of Vietnam and China, where life is somewhat back to normal, I'm really interested to hear their views. Now, I'd like to pose a question to all our panelists. And the question is, how can the global education community use this moment as an opportunity to build back better and to meet the demands of the future? How about we start with Andrew, followed by Jean-Philippe, Douglas, and Louie. So over to you now, Andrew.
Great, thanks Liz for the question and the introduction. I think first we really need to accept that the pandemic has brought about a paradigm shift in the way people are willing to interact with each other and the way we work and the way we learn. So with that in mind, we need to understand that these changes have both good and bad attributes. And we're still trying to navigate our way and understand these as they impact people in different ways around the world. So moving forward, I think we need to continue to work together and experiment to find new solutions that combine the best of what we had, physical proximity, cultural diversity, human experience together, with what technology now allows us to do comfortably. Seamless connectivity, the choice, flexibility about when and where we learn, access to people and resources that we didn't have before. But at the same time, we need to be vigilant as the impacts on mental health and personal well-being of people differ person to person and country to country around the world. So as much as we've all been impacted by the pandemic, how it is experienced as individuals and as communities continues to be different in different parts of the world. So what I see as essential in moving forward in Vietnam, where I'm located, is essentially or often different to what's happening in other countries and how they need to move forward and what they're dealing with. And I think it's important that we take that sort of global view and global differences into account in developing our strategies in design and in learning pedagogies and facilities as well.
Okay, so thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Elizabeth, for the introduction. So as an acoustic consultant for 30 years, around 30 years now, I'm working on many schools projects, and over the years, I have observed that the education in general has new needs and new demands. And these new needs are translated into design with new trends. On the acoustic point of view, what I have seen is that it has a strong impact on the spaces and the uses of these spaces. And this brings more complexity, in fact. If we take, for example, the example of the open spaces, with sometimes different activities at the same time, we still need a high level of communication, but in the same time, we need to avoid noise propagation and distractions. So this is more complex than what we had maybe in the traditional environment. So new trends for me associated with good acoustics should help to keep or bring better performance and well-being to the users. And today's discussion, I think, should help the learning community, education community, to better understand these new challenges and the new complexities that goes with it.
Thank you, Andrew and JP. How about from you, Douglas?
There we go. Thanks, Liz. So, you know, I would suggest that the demands that education has in the future are not too different now than what they were before the pandemic. And I say that with the framework of education is designed to inspire and prepare students with the tools for the future, right? And as the future changes, we then adapt, but sort of the mission of education is still the same. I think one thing we have learned is a greater comfort for using virtual classroom technology, such as what we're doing now. And what that allows us to do is cast a wider net on education overall. So say, for example, we're 20 students sitting in a room here together in Shanghai, but we could be joining educators and other classmates who are based anywhere from Copenhagen to Cape Town. And what this does is it allows us to cast a wider net globally across our education network. So we're no longer confined to learning from the particular teachers or educators that we have locally. We can certainly broaden that, and I think that's something that we've globally learned from the pandemic, that we've developed this ease with using this type of technology. But I will say one thing, that educational facilities, what they do really, really well is building that sense of community with each other. And whether that's through social interaction, trust, building memories and experiences together. And a lot of that happens during those unscheduled times before, after the class. And that's something that we can't replace with technology. Technology is very good at scheduling interactions, but it doesn't do very well at unscheduled interactions. And that's where we get a lot of benefit through educational environments. So we still need that. We still need that person to person.
Thank you. And we'll hear from Louie as well.
I think the role of air quality, that's my focus in reducing airborne disease transmission. It's not new. Anybody who's gone through flu season and sees the impact of 10 to 20% of students and teachers out sick know that this is significant. But COVID's brought everything into focus, because having an actual systematic approach of preventing COVID or reducing it from being transmitted through the air with smart technologies in a better way is now something you need to do just to get people back into the classrooms. But aside from just not getting ill, I want to highlight that achieving better ventilation, which is kind of a cornerstone for controlling COVID, also results in better learning. So we get a double benefit that makes looking at this as spending time and investment much more worthwhile. There's just been so much research that Liz referred to, the Harvard School for on the impact of carbon dioxide on cognitive performance. There's so much of that research, not just within schools, but within athletic performance, call centers, even military marksmanship, that it's surprising me that a lot of design conferences, we hear about how form impacts learning, the use of flexible spaces, but we don't hear a lot about the physical environment. And so that's one thing that I want to talk about a little bit today. It's a trend that I was seeing before COVID hit. And so I think one of the no-brainers now is to take the momentum, using this as being something good to reopen schools, but also use that as something we should have been doing anyways to enhance learning in the first place.
Great. Thank you so much to all our speakers. I think these are all intriguing comments and feedback, and it's very aligned with our global research as well. And towards what we're observing, there's definitely focus on well-being. And I heard well-being, I heard actually positivity and building communities. And well-being for us, it's not just physical, but it's also cognitive and emotional. And knowing that, for instance, the indoor air quality can affect your cognitive abilities, I think there are a lot of elements that we can look at. So with that, I would like to actually direct our conversation towards our design experts, which will be Andrew and Douglas. So Andrew, I'd like to put forward this. In our research, we found that a sense of belonging in education was an important need for the students and educators to look for a more human-centered approach to education, and that creates a sense of belonging. It is demonstrated that people who have a sense of belonging showed higher enjoyment, interest, confidence, happiness, enthusiasm, and better health. So Andrew, in your experience, how do you design and manage the need for this in learning environments?
Thanks, Liz. So for me, design needs to be part of a broader strategy to create places and spaces that help students and teachers feel connected not only to each other, but to their school and to their immediate surroundings. This becomes more challenging now when we see learning environments being distributed geographically across multiple locations. And many of those locations we have no way of controlling or influencing, like inside people's homes. So if we bring it back to what we can influence, and we consider architecture and interior design as two of those areas, architecture can make a bold or a big opening statement in the form of physical and visual foundation for that sense of belonging. Think RMIT, particularly in Melbourne, where every one of their buildings is designed to sort of have a strong visual impact, to create a sense of belonging to Melbourne and belonging to RMIT specifically. Inside, on the interior, the message is often far more nuanced and delivered through, for us anyway, delivered through some bold statements for sure in different spaces, but also through careful selection and repetition of colors, materials, and other visual materials such as wayfinding and signage that are all taking their cue from an understanding of what the overall sort of visual characteristics and culture of the educator and education facility wants to be and wants to communicate. So when you put all of those things together, and it comes down to even uniforms and the other sort of indicators of where people are studying and what they belong to, then it's the compounding and the integration of all those, for me, that really helps to create a sense of identity and a sense of belonging to that place and the community that also chooses to study there.
I like it that you use, the example of a uniform, right? It's something that, if we need that uniform and we put it on, and we immediately become part of a certain community or a club or a group, and that sense of belonging is one of the important need that we found emerging, especially with people learning from home or working from home for an extended period of time, and not by choice. So it's kind of like for us slowly coming back to work, and we start to realize and miss those connections that we had at work. How we often talk about the colleagues at work is kind of like our work family, and I think that's what we really miss as well, those people, connections and communities. So thank you, Andrew. Now over to Douglas. Douglas, control is another area of focus in terms of the need to express, in terms of the need expressed by students and instructors as they desire control over where and how they learn. The UK's Learning Environment Evaluation Study reports a 122% increase in students who say they often and or always want to be able to move furniture to support their learning. And instructors report a 76% increase when asked if they agree or strongly agree that they want to be able to move furniture into the new layouts. So Douglas, in your experience, how do you facilitate learning environments that allow students and educators to feel more control over their learning?
Yeah, Liz, I think this is a great point, because I think when we talk about control, the idea of control in an education environment, it either typically favors the education system or it favors the students. Typically it doesn't do both. And traditionally, control has been in favor of the education systems being based on transactional methods, right, between teacher and student. So I give you a question, you give me a correct answer, and we're able to measure that. And that's happened for centuries. And why? Because this is based on a form of measurement through standardized exams on whether or not the system, the education system, is working. It's not based on whether or not students are learning. It's based on, is the system working the way I want it to be working? So it actually promotes conformity, not learning. And but if we think about actually how we learn, this idea that you mentioned, which is touching on facilitated learning, which is where the educator themselves, he or she, is no longer the vessel for supplying knowledge, right? You don't need that person to deliver the knowledge to you, but instead, it is more about guiding the process. That person, the teacher, is kind of giving up control over you learning, you the student, and guiding a more organic learning experience. So it's moving from traditionally passive learning, which is everyone sitting at their desk and just kind of facing forward and taking notes, where you're just absorbing, towards a more active learning environment. This is what your statistic, Liz, is getting towards. So one example that jumps to mind, this is one that I love. 5 years ago, a high school biology teacher in Indiana in the US, his name's Joe Roll, and this was on a TEDx, where he talked about experimenting with a new type of classroom. Now, this was in like 2015, 2016. And he created his classroom in a way that allowed students to either learn from his lecture, learn from computer training software, or through interactive games, or through sitting alone and reading, or through hands-on experimentation, all at the same time in the same room, right? So it meant that students were not lined up in rows facing towards the front of the room. In fact, there was no front of the room. So the teacher, Joe, was actually moving around the room at all times during the class. Now, all of the students were learning the same curriculum, but they were learning it in different ways that matched their psychology, their behavioral methods, whatever that may be that makes us unique. So to answer your question, how do we design learning environments to that? I think we can take a page from Joe's book and think about classrooms, but it's a bit more complex than that, right? We don't necessarily have one design that fits everything. So I believe we have to think about three aspects when we're designing education spaces to be the most effective. One is, what are we learning? Are we learning chemistry or calculus or cryptocurrency trading? You know, the subject matter plays a factor in what the environment should be. Number two, who's learning it? So what age are they? What is their cultural, social background? This is something that Andrew, I think, was touching on. So we all learn uniquely, even if we are coming from the same culture. We all have different past experiences, prior knowledge, prejudices that make us different, right? I myself am a very visual learner, right? So if I'm actually really bad at learning things just from reading or hearing it. But if I can visualize it, I remember it very, very well. And that's just the way my brain works. And if a class gets too boring, my ADD kicks in and I start getting distracted. So how do we keep different people engaged in one environment? And the third thing that I think is often overlooked is, when are we learning certain information? So the time of day can actually have an impact on how alert, how focused, how self-motivated, how collaborative we are in an environment. So for example, and this is actually studied, so it's scientifically proven in our biology that most of us are more focused and more problem-solving oriented in the morning. And we're typically a bit more social, a bit more relaxed in the early afternoon. And then in the early evening, we're a bit more active and collaborative again. So when you learn certain subjects throughout the day can actually make you more engaged, or how you learn it. So can the space evolve during the day, right? And I think that gets back to the question of design. We have to design spaces that can change throughout the day and even day to day.
Yeah. And that really kind of resonates a lot with a workplace as well as school, where moving towards more activity-based learning or activity-based working. And with that as well, I mean, at this time of the day that you mentioned, you know, we hope the audiences are also really interested in joining us and putting their questions forward in the chat box as well. So we get them, you know, activated. So now with that, I'd like to actually share, based on the challenges and the needs that we've recently identified in Learn Better research, we actually uncovered 4 macro shifts that institutions and organizations will need to look at when designing space for learning. And these include safety, productivity and effectiveness, inspiration, and flexibility. So now I'd like to push out a poll question to get the audience perspective. So the question is, please select one out of the 4 macro shifts. So we will be showing this on screen. You'll be seeing it now. Please select one out of the 4 macro shifts which you feel will have the greatest impact over your learning experiences. And each of these factors would have an expanded text to give it a bit of explanation. So which of these macro shifts will create the greatest impact over your learning? And we'll give the audiences less than a minute to put forward your responses. It's safety, productivity and effectiveness, inspiration, or flexibility. Now, as we allow the audiences to put forward their response, I'm really intrigued to see the responses. I mean, I know what I will choose, but I'm just curious. Andrew, what would be your answer?
Yeah, they're all important. I'm going to go with inspiration for a couple of reasons,
okay.
But I'll talk about that later.
Cool, great. I actually chose flexibility, so I'm not sure which of the panelists would have the same answer as me, but hopefully we will have the results from our audiences. So while we wait for that, when we review the response, I would like to invite our environmental experts, which is Jean-Philippe and Louie, to actually share the thoughts. So we will wait for the results and the poll. Great. So, we have, very interesting. We have flexibility being number 1, inspiration, followed by productivity and safety. Wait, sorry, I'm not seeing the full screen. Give me a second. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Great. So while we close it, yeah, maybe Louie, let me ask you a question, because based on our global study, the data actually indicates that safety emerges as one of the top priorities for users when they return to work or learn. The safety actually includes some of the factors we look at is air quality, adherence to safety protocols, and the general cleanliness of the facility. So Louie, in terms of this response from the audiences, I'd like to hear your comments on the results pertaining to safety.
Yeah, thanks, Liz. I guess I'll frame this not just within COVID, but within sort of 10 years of working in the China market, where I would say you cannot open a new school without having an air quality plan. So it is flavored a bit by that, but I've seen over the rest of the world, you know, wildfires have caused, when we look at the most polluted places in the world, actually Oregon last summer topped the world as the most polluted place in the world, which means that we're seeing more awareness of safety, not just within these considered polluted countries. So I think there's like three areas that I'd highlight. The first one is that right now with COVID, airborne transmission of COVID, airborne risk is the biggest gap, probably because it was the last one to be recognized. What I mean by this is direct transmission is something that's known and it's fairly covered by wearing masks. The second one, indirect transmission through touching surfaces. For the most part, cleaning protocols, and also because viruses are not very survivable, it means that it's not that sort of the most important one. But the recognition that viruses float through the air on small droplets of saliva and can be breathed in and can be in the air for more than the 6 feet that's advised is something new, and there's a lot of lack of information. So if we were to, the second point is moving to kind of what's a takeaway for solutions. It's really comes down to more outdoor air ventilation, recirculating filtration within a space, and ultraviolet sterilization. Those are the 3 primary ways that most strategies are built around, or some combination. And it is bespoke. If you're in southern France, for instance, you can't just open the window. I'm sorry, if you're in southern France and you could open the window for natural ventilation, but if you're in China, Northern California, you can't open the window because it's either very dirty outside or there's wildfires. And if you're in Montreal, you can't do it because it's the middle of the winter and you'll freeze. So you have to find other ways of either modifying your building system or using some novel technologies like modular systems, bring air out from windows into a classroom and filtering it. The third is smart. So we talk about smart buildings. This is penetrating air quality as well, because we have to use active measurement that ties into operations. What I mean by that is if you have a box in the classroom or a meeting room that says, here's what the air quality is, you still need somebody to look at that box and do something and know what to do with that number. That's a gap. And if that person then leaves, you have to train somebody else. In most cases, what I see is that operations fall short of what was designed. So the good thing is with all Internet of Things, smart buildings, we're tying readings and real-time performance with how the environment is being adapted. Just like I thought it was great what Doug talked about, changing the environments from day to day and even hour by hour. This is very possible. The last thing is we have to communicate this safety effectively. It's not enough to just be safe. You have to feel safe. And that's why we have mobile apps for air quality and COVID risk indices. There's something about looking down at your phone and seeing a number on the mobile app and a smiley face that just makes people, let them relax, focus, and learn or work.
Great, thanks, Louie. And I mean, these are all great points, and we're going to deep dive further into that safety aspect later. So now I'd like to toggle over to Jean-Philippe, and I'd like to have your views regards productivity and effectiveness, right? To further expand that, it's really about the management of acoustics to enable better productivity in the learning environments, as we see a greater shift towards more multi-modal spaces. So the question is, how can we cater for better acoustics management to reduce the learners and educators' stress and fatigue as they toggle between these open and enclosed space, which is part of a design principle of learn better?
Yes, so first, I think what is interesting from the poll is that all the questions you ask show that all these points are important. None of them have been missed, so I think it's quite interesting. For the productivity and effectiveness, for me, it's really important because it has a direct link with acoustics. We know that we cannot achieve this productivity and effectiveness without a good acoustic environment. If we know, for example, that 60% of the teaching activity involves speech between teacher and students or between students, we can understand easily that the acoustic quality of the space has an important role in this communication. If the reverberation or the acoustic, generally speaking, of the space is not proper, so we will have a decrease of the clarity of the voice, of the speech intelligibility. So that doesn't mean that people will not be able to understand what is being said in the space, but their brain will have to work harder to recreate the missing part. So this brings fatigues after hours of exposure and stress. So it has a strong impact on the productivity. In the same way with the the open space trends and the social area, we have to manage in a more complex way the noise propagation that can bring some more distractions and difficulty to focus. So yes, acoustics is very closely linked with the productivity and effectiveness. So for me, it's very clear. So we need to be able to control this acoustic environment to keep high productivity and effectiveness. So for me, this is a real key point in this discussion.
Great, thanks JP. And other than productivity, we're going to deep dive into flexibility later in the space. And I do see a lot of chat going on in the chat box. So thank you audiences for participating. This is really important for us, your comments and your thoughts. So just to establish that the four shifts that we talk about are macro shifts. They're not necessarily just the fundamental that impacts learning experiences, but these are the macro shifts that we are starting to see based on the Learn Better research. So with that, and just being mindful of the time, we want to be able to deep dive a little bit into the micro shifts or trends and have each of our speakers talk about that. So we've learned from the audiences in terms of what they think is important when it will affect their learning experiences. So we're going to deep dive. I actually want to go in accordance to how we voted for it, but maybe we'll do this this way. So with Andrew, I want to talk about inspiration, right? It's coming up as a second importance to flexibility. So the idea of inspiration is where we really start to see learning get excited, and the desire for learning spaces to inspire and the designers and architects delivering on this promise is wonderful for us to witness its due case. So Andrew, can you share a project that you work on where you use the environment to inspire and foster community through belonging?
Okay, well, I'd like to think that every project that we do has two key criteria. One is to be inspirational, and the second is to be aspirational. No space is neutral, so it's going to contain these attributes, hopefully. So what's most important then for us is understanding how these two critical parameters translate into specific strategies, specific design outcomes for each particular project, because every school we design, every classroom we design has specific elements to it that are sort of deeply embedded in the culture of the education institution or the client that we're working for. And these differences allow us to develop design solutions that are unique to those projects or to the clients or to the context. So then I think the most inspirational thing that we can aim for is that people are proud of the space and proud of the facilities that they choose to be educated in or choose to teach in. If design can help create a deep sense of pride and a deep sense of identity, then I think we're well on the way to providing people a platform to perform at their best and to learn and to teach and to be the best they can be.
Thank you, Andrew. And I want to leave more time for the speakers. So we're going to move over to Douglas. Douglas, in terms of productivity and effectiveness, at Steelcase, we see the design of education environment move from incorporating single-purpose spaces to multi-modal spaces. This trend led to a design principle we call fixed versus fluid. As multi-modal learning spaces support multiple purpose and pedagogies, there is a need for adaptable learning spaces, including highly mobile furniture, power, technology, and space division. So Douglas, in your experience, how do you design for this, and what are the benefits of it when it's done right?
Thanks, Lit. I love this concept of fixed to fluid and spaces that are becoming fluid, because this is really something that's moving in everything that we do. Multimodal spaces is in everything from workplace to education spaces. And I believe that technology plays a very important role in influencing this paradigm shift, whether it's how we charge our phone and how we charge our devices and, you know, how we're interacting with each other. Technology is certainly a catalyst for being able to have furniture and materials that can change. But this paradigm shift that we're seeing to happen towards fluid spaces, you know, I believe this is a shift from a teacher-centered classroom to a student-centered classroom. It's where environments are designed in different ways, where students can learn in a way that best suits them as individuals, and not about, you know, the teacher doing their job. I think it's a paradigm shift from linear spaces to circular spaces, where we're seeing classrooms, classroom design transformed away from desks being in rows, all facing, you know, one way towards a singular screen and a teacher's desk. Instead, we're moving towards, and circular spaces being something more of a workshop fashion, where you have pods and stations around the room that offer different levels and types of engagement that are more effective to actual learning in a more active way. So, you know, and that allows students to learn in different ways. So technology is certainly going to be a big factor on that. And so what this suggests is rooms that are designed at the scale of the student, that can reconfigure, adapt, and change in space, just as you mentioned, Liz, day to day and hour to hour. The best example that I would give to just help visualize this is a garage or a warehouse, where everything inside the external boundaries of the building are furniture or equipment, right? And you know, we're talking about partitions that are on wheels, where shelving and writable surfaces can snap on, snap off. Partitions are modular, so that rooms themselves can expand and contract. Digital screens that are mobile carts rather than being fixed on a wall or hanging from a ceiling. Power, as you mentioned, Liz, you know, we're starting to see the technology change the same way that we charge our phones through contact charging. We're going to see that ramp up into things like furniture. So it could be strips on the floors and the ceilings, where you just kind of have that contact and you now have power in your furniture. Individual desks, for example, can gang together and become teaming tables. Clever storage devices. So there's a lot of, you know, ways that we can think about, but essentially what this comes down to is less what I would call contractor built rooms, right? Less concrete walls and gypsum board studs going up, and more modular snap-on, snap-off furniture, mobile furniture, and equipment, of course. And I believe this is the direction that we're going to start seeing in a lot of different interior design, especially education spaces. And this is what's going to make us have fluid learning spaces.
Great. And I think, you know, with your point, Douglas, that really allows me to come in nicely and have a conversation with JP. You know, we want to talk about flexibility in a space. And JP, one of the design principles developed through our global study is the me and the we concept, where environments are challenged to equally support large groups, small groups, and individuals, and allow for quick shifts between learning alone and learning together. JP, can you share with us how can we accommodate for flexibility in the function of a space and yet without compromising the acoustic quality?
Yeah, thank you, Liz. I think the flexibility is a very important topic. In the traditional education space, I would say that was easy for the acoustic consultant, because we can say one space, one use. So it's very clear. We have a classroom. So we need to have a good speech intelligibility to ease the communication and avoid fatigue. we have a good insulation, so we avoid a distraction. So that was simple because we have very clear targets. In the new trend, with multimodal spaces and the flexibility that is associated, it's much more difficult because we need to control the acoustic environment for different uses and sometimes at the same time. If we take the example of the open working space, we might have some group working together, but in the same time, individual working alone. So we have the conflicting targets. We need to be able to communicate easily, but at the same time, we don't want to disturb or distract others. So that means no noise propagation and decreased speech intelligibility at longer distance. So this is very challenging for the acoustic design of this type of space. So flexibility is not simple to address for us. So different targets from the same space at the same time. And I want to say that very often we see a common mistake in the design. I have observed that in some projects, a lot of acoustic treatment were proposed, maybe too much. I would call it over-treated, with the idea that bringing a lot of absorption will create the magic of perfect acoustic environment. And in fact, if we put too much acoustic material in a space, it's true that we will reduce the reverberation, we will reduce the noise propagation, but at the same time, we will increase the clarity even at long distance. So the space will be very quiet, which is not the target for acoustic. Quiet is not ideal, and if it's very quiet and very clear, it means that you can hear and understand someone whispering 10 meters away. So this brings distraction. So the design of this type of space has to be very well balanced. And I was very interested on what Douglas just said about the flexibility, because once we have designed the acoustic of the space, it's quite fixed. In fact, you cannot change the ceiling or the wall panels all the time. So one solution, once we have create the right balance in terms of materials and geometry of the space, is the use of the furniture, because we have on the market a lot of different types. Steelcase has very interesting products with acoustic properties, so we can play with the furniture to use their acoustic properties to bring some flexibility. So we can adjust how we install and localize the different furniture with different acoustic properties. So when we do the design, we don't think only on the ceiling, the walls, but also how to use the furnitures with their properties to bring this flexibility, including for acoustics needs.
Great, thanks, JP. And with that leaves allow us to move to the last point, which is safety. And I'm thinking it's actually rank number 4. It's maybe because everyone is kind of adjusted to the new norms, and we are assured that there's a certain safety standard in our environment. So Louie, safety has always been considered, right? But it's even more so now, where students and educators need to feel safe in learning environments. Recently, there's been a real focus of shift from health and safety standards that institutions comply with to smart campuses and or adopt a systematic approach to mitigate disease spread. So Louie, with what has your experience been with at PureLiving, and have you seen client demand?
First, if I can, I want to try to not be pigeonholed as a safety guy, because I think that as we talk about these macro trends, productivity and flexibility is a key part of what we're seeing as baked into a good air quality design and good air quality operations. Is that it allows you, if you do it successfully, you're not just safe, but you're actually enhancing the learning or the productivity. Also, if you do it right and you're building it in with these smart technologies, you're very flexible and you're very adaptive to be able to meet. If you double the size of the class, what happens to the air? Can you increase and change the environment so that it supports the activity that's happening in the space? So I don't see safety as being independent of these. Now, going back to talking about standards and moving into smart, I guess I have to disagree a little bit, because I feel that standards are still very important. For anybody who's looking at building a good air quality system for their school, or bringing their school up to par, I think you have to start with setting standards that will, you need to set the bar so you know where you need to go. So many times we hear designers or engineers or a school owner or investor say, I want health. But you ask them, what does this mean? As a designer, do you want to have the US EPA standard? Do you want to have the WHO standard? Do you want to have the green building standard? They're all very different, and they will require different types of engineering and also different budgets. So we have to start with the same language of where do you want to get to. And right now, what that means in a school is standards that maximize fresh air or ventilation, not just at the building level, but in each space. So all the time we see schools that have been designed on paper with good air. But when you actually look, once it's been built, they haven't necessarily considered what's happening at the end room level, or maybe a meeting room. Everyone's been in a beautiful office, but you're in the meeting room and you're sweating and it's stuffy and it's smelly. That's because we did not think about and design and measurements. So the standards, generally, that means we want to have carbon dioxide levels of lower than, let's say, 800 parts per million. But we also need to filter the air, because micro droplets of saliva will carry the virus, and we have to remove those. Generally, so we need to be thinking about our particulate readings and our fresh air readings. The second thing we need to think about is moving from standards to smart, is to make sure we build in real-time air quality monitors. These are getting cheaper and cheaper. Just to give you a rough sense, around $500 US gets you a monitor that gives you a wealth of information about how you're doing. The third is engineered solutions are going to be better, whether that's upgrading the building ventilation or putting commercial in-ceiling purifiers for commercial space. That's better than portables that often get turned off, we find, because of noise. The last thing is around automation. This is the flexibility that I talked about. If you connect up the monitors with what's actually going on, if you can connect that to these systems, you take out they'll self-adjust, they'll save energy, and they show you validation that the system's actually working. We don't even need any operators to have any training. You just almost set what you want to go to, which comes back to why you need standards, and then the system runs itself. That is, I think, what is the lowest sort of pain, the least painful way to get there.
Right. Thanks, Louie. Great sharing. I mean, if you ask Andrew and Douglas about the design standard in terms of health, I'm sure based on their respective locations, in Shanghai and in Vietnam, it's going to be very different. And so thank you so much to all our panelists for sharing all these great insights. Now, I just want to make sure that we also have time to take questions and answers. So I'm going to invite all the speakers to have a concluding feedback for this. So I have a concluding question to all our speakers, and it is, if you were to share one idea or an area or concept that you believe is the most important to focus on in developing effective, enjoyable learning environments to take us forward into the 21st century, what would it be? With that, I think I'll go with the same flow, starting with Andrew, Jean-Philippe, Douglas, and then to you, Louie. So over to you, Andrew.
Okay, this is a challenging question, this one, to choose one thing. So I'm going to choose two. Diversity and authenticity. And the reason I choose those, well, first of all, we live in a fantastically diverse world. And I personally believe that embracing and celebrating that diversity is one of the biggest and most impactful steps we can take, not only to solving the problems of the world, but to sort of embracing a broader world view. But also, what we see now is just in terms of the diversity of spaces that we're having to apply design to has grown enormously. And as I mentioned before, we concentrate on, of course, making physical space responsive, flexible, inspirational, and now we having to include into our design process and the facilities we're designing a significant amount of, well, I'll call it space that's virtual space that we're not designing at this point in time because it's not inside the project that we're working in. So that, that's where we're having to put a lot of our attention at the moment. And we're working on projects, large school projects with classrooms with no sort of typical classroom furniture, with no walls, other environments that are 100% virtual. So the diversity of what we need to deal with now is much, much greater. And then authenticity, I think, because particularly as we start to deal with these virtual spaces, it becomes even more difficult to understand what is and what isn't authentic. If I look at all of our backgrounds now, except for maybe Louie, they all look like they're our real backgrounds. But on the weekend, I was on the Skype call with my parents, and I was changing the background, and you could not tell that it was not the background, the real background behind me. So as we move forward, many of the things, the soft skills and learnings we develop at school and in our education process, trust, authenticity, where people are from, the nuances, we're going to have to find new ways to experience those. For me, and I think for most people like myself, who've had the privilege of an international education and growing up in other countries, at the end of the day, it is that international experience that is the most profound and the most impactful, not the curriculum that we learned at that school. And I think that's, as designers, that's going to be one of our biggest, or that will be one of our biggest challenges moving forward, sort of in this new paradigm of sort of hybrid learning between physical and virtual space.
Great, thanks, Andrew. These two factors of diversity and authenticity is also really important when we approach things in student case as well. So over to you now, JP. So
I think we all agree that the new environment brings new opportunities. There is a great potential of better education. So this is clear for everyone. But the new trends and the new design, as we were saying, brings much more complexity in our work as designers, acoustic designers for me. And I believe that if we miss this part during our design, and I'm talking about acoustic, our dream of a perfect learning environment can easily become a nightmare for the students and for the teachers. And this is something I've already seen. So really a bad acoustic environment can be really difficult to live with. So I'm talking about nightmare. So for me, the key fact would be that because of the complexity, when we start to design a new school, for example, we need to take time to understand the needs and the use of each space. And it sounds very simple, but today's with our tools, simulation tools, I would say that we are able to reach any targets we are aiming for. It's very easy. You tell me I need 0.75 seconds of reverberation. I can give it to you with no problem. But with the flexibility of the new spaces, it's very difficult to know or to define precisely what are the targets. So for me, the important part for an acoustic consultant on a project is to take time at the beginning, at the early beginning of the design, take time to understand properly the design intention, the use of every space, to be able to define the proper targets. And then once we have the targets, it's quite easy to reach. And I think this is the only way to reach a great learning experience for the future users.
Sure. Thanks, JP. And we're really stretched on time, so it's going to be like for Douglas and Louie, how do we keep this really quick in 1 minute, because we want to be able to take at least one question. So over to you, Douglas, and then Louie. All
right, one idea in 1 minute, right? I would say for the future of learning spaces, and I'm coming at this from a designer's perspective. To give it a word, I would say playfulness. And the reason I say that is that we already actually have learning spaces that are effective and enjoyable environments. It's called preschool. And they're already designed in many of the ways that we've mentioned. They're typically highly active, engaging environments, constantly changing, allowing for new ways for young children to learn. And so somewhere along the way, we grew up and believed that learning needs to be serious. And we made it much more passive, one-directional, standardized, systematic education spaces. But guess what? We still like to learn like a preschool child. And, have these spaces that are engaging and active and fun. We as adults or students of all ages do learn better that way. We learn better when we're having fun. And if we start to think that way and start to adopt some of these ideas that we implement into children's learning environments, young children's learning environments, we may actually have quite spectacular adult learning spaces.
Great, thank you, Douglas. Louie.
Okay, I like to stay in the practical. So I think what I'd like to see in the future of designing learning environments with respect to air quality is to have adaptive and automatic technology to creating indoor air quality that lets our students measurably learn better and feel safer. So the practical, how this is real, or to make it a real example, is in the steel case meeting room that Doug is sitting in. We have a monitor that detects, I don't know how many people are in there, but it detects how much carbon dioxide there is in there. And when there's too much, it automatically turns on a purifier that's mounted outside of that meeting room. That brings in more fresh air.
Okay. I think we may have lost Louie for a very quick moment. So I guess while he waits to join in, and I just want to be mindful of the time, Louie? Okay, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna pick one of this question which I think it's really interesting. So while we wait for Louie to come back, the question is, and I'll ask to all our speakers, we talk a lot about indoor spaces, and however, increasingly there are outdoor learning spaces. So how do we make those experience better? So to Douglas, Andrew, and then JP, if you can talk very quickly on that.
So Liz, the question is, how do we think about outdoor learning spaces?
How do you make those experience better?
Okay, assuming weather is not a factor and you've got a nice day and all of these things. One thing that outdoor learning spaces can do quite well is to change your state of mind, right? So we typically, when we walk into a classroom, there's certain associations with a classroom. Oh, okay, I'm going to be bored or whatever. But once you go outside, and this is why field trips are so great in schools, is that it can completely change the sensory experience that you have. If the breeze is blowing, or if the sun is shining, and whatever other sort of experiences that you're having can actually make for a more enjoyable experience. Obviously, I'll let someone like Louie talk more about the air, but I think outdoor environments, yeah, I think anywhere can be a learning space. It doesn't have to be a classroom. Take people to a museum or a coffee shop or wherever, a cave, and you can have a totally different experience, and you may actually get people more focused, and it may become more memorable that way because you are engaging your senses in different ways.
Sure. So I'm gonna, now that Louie is back, so maybe I'll just have Andrew respond to this. How do we make outdoor spaces better? And then we'll toggle back to Louie quickly just for that closing concluding statement. So Andrew, over to you.
Good. I think Douglas makes his points are spot on. I would only just add that I think to take full advantage of that sort of change in environment and the benefits that can bring, that what you're learning and the teaching methodology needs to change as well, so that the outdoor environment becomes almost the subject of the lesson. So to take a standard maths class outside and teach a standard maths class in the sun doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you look at the environment and that becomes the way to learn, then that's going to make a huge difference, I think, to everyone that's in that sort of situation.
Great, thanks, Andrew. And now we'll toggle back to Louie. Louie, are you back with us?
I hope so. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Very quick. I would say adaptive and automatic technologies to create indoor air quality that lets our students measurably learn better and feel safer. As a real example, in the steel case meeting room that Doug is sitting in, we have a monitor that detects when there's too much carbon dioxide from too many people in there, automatically turns on the purifier that's sitting outside of that meeting room, which brings in fresh air into that space. And then the people inside who are training, taking classes, making decisions, they don't need to do anything. They just are able to do what they're there to do. They get more oxygen, and they're able to see on the monitor something that reassures them that they are safe. So I'd love to see that scaled up outside of a meeting room to a classroom to a school, and it's just an easier way of learning better.
Great. Thanks, Louie, and thank you so much to all our accomplished speakers for sharing your your experience and your knowledgeable insights. So with that, mindful of the time, we did overrun a little bit, but I wanted to kind of share my key takeaways for this session. So what we really learned is that—
Hey, Liz.
Yes.
Can I just give a shout, before you summarize, can I just give a shout out to Ben, our illustrator, because I just think he's been doing an awesome job this whole time. Super creative sketches that I'm seeing here. And I just thought he should get some recognition.
Yes, definitely. That was actually on the last part, but yes, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I stole that from you. I'm sorry.
Not at all. But yeah, thank you, Ben. And yeah, so kind of summarizing, evidently our experiences in 2020 has given rise to new challenges and opportunities based on what we've learned in terms of our discussion today. So really is that we now have better knowledge to actually create a more resilient learning environment. What I heard throughout this entire session is about definitely user-centric, which is student-centric, adult-centric. It is also about well-being, a lot of emphasis in that. How do you support cognitive functions? manage the stress level and fatigue level of the users. We also talk about how can you create inspiring and playful learning environments. And a lot of times we're also looking at data-driven. How do we allow all these systematic approach to create data that we not only feel safe, but we know that it is safe given the data that we have. So yeah, with that, I think we've come to the end of our final series. So again, thank you to all our speakers and as well as our illustrator, Ben. It's been enjoyable. Thank you very much, audiences. And till next time, take care. Bye.